About a year ago, I realized that I was extremely lonely. Why I hadn't realized sooner, I have no idea. Even though all the facts were right in front of me, telling me why I was like this. I told myself that I need to put myself out there. I kept telling myself this for 2 weeks, and I finally got off my ass and decided to try online dating. I logged onto a website, of which I can no longer find on the internet, so it shall remain nameless, and took a deep breath. I created an account. Nothing weird or abnormal occurred, except that every time I looked away from the website's glistening gold logo, it looked like it flashed a different color for only a split second. I tried to catch it in the act several times and was unsuccessful. I gave up trying this and put my final bits of information into the website, including a profile picture, my email confirmation code, and so on. I began searching for women in my area. Surprisingly, I found 17 women who weren't much older than I was, in a 1 to 3 mile radius. Damn, I said to myself. I was about to say something else when a notification came up from a woman named, let's call her Abby. Abby and I began chatting, exchanging words like nice profile picture, thank yous and hellos, and many other words were being thrown around. I noticed that she was almost within walking distance of my apartment, living about 6 blocks down. I was gonna ask if she wanted to do something later that day, but she took the words right out of my mouth. I replied with, sure, how's 7 p.m. for you? She said, any time is fine actually. Okay, well, see you then. Bye. She left the chat. I started getting ready for what I thought might have been the biggest night of my entire life. As I was applying deodorant, I suddenly remembered that I hadn't told her my address. The worst part was, it was 6:58 p.m. Shit, I gotta tell her where I was cut off by a knock at the door. I had no idea what I was about to get into. I walked towards the door and opened it, thinking that I had received a package or something. But this was no package. Maybe a package from hell? I'll just say it. Abby was standing outside my door. She said, hello, Ray. I wanted to ask how she was there, but I politely replied, hi. You want to go to that fancy place down the street? She said. I was a bit nervous and reluctant to respond, but I thought for a second and said, sure. We walked out of my apartment and I locked the door. The fact that she had somehow found my apartment no longer concerned me as it did before. What was important was that she was here, and I wasn't lonely anymore. We walked to the restaurant. We stayed and talked for about 2.5 hours. We ate excellent food and were treated fairly. She wanted to come back to my apartment, and of course, we all know what that means. I said, sure, it's up to you. We ran back to my apartment, and that was the official best night of my life. I awoke the next morning with her in my bed. She greeted me with a, good morning, honey. I replied with, good morning. She told me that she had to go, that her brother was coming from Kentucky that afternoon. We got dressed and I said goodbye to her as I walked her to the door. I watched as she crossed the street. This was about a minute or two later. She was just walking off the sidewalk when a car hit her. I ran down to the street to see if I could clear her off the streets. Thank God it was the red light. I ran to where she was, but she wasn't there. Her body, there was no trace of her. I swore to myself as I walked back into my apartment and started up my computer. I wanted to delete my account on that website so bad. I logged on and noticed the color-changing logo stayed the color it looked when I looked away. I had one message Notification. It was from Abby. "Hi honey, last night was amazing." I didn't respond. I just deleted my account. I was so done at that moment. Never again, I said to myself. Never. I was pulled from a dead sleep by a dull thud. Sitting up in my bed, I looked at the clock and realized I had slept in. The red numbers read just after 1 in the afternoon. I lay back down and closed my eyes, waking my body up in a stretch. I lay there for a moment and heard the thump again, recognizing it as a knock on the door. My dog started to bark outside in the backyard as I pulled myself out of bed and grabbed clothes. The knock sounded again. 1 second, I called. I pulled on my shirt and shorts and went out to see who it was. I peeked through the little peephole in the door, having to stand on my toes to see. An elderly woman stood there for a moment before she knocked again, making me jump. I unlocked the door and opened it. She smiled, but despite the fact that she had a kind of look about her, I couldn't help but feel that something wasn't right. The woman looked odd. She had thick, tangled black and gray hair, wrinkly tan skin, and wore clothes like she had been in them for a while. They were faded, and she had a smell that came off her that made my stomach turn. When she smiled, I could see she was missing some teeth, and what teeth she had were yellowed and rotting. I tried hard to remain polite, though the smell of her was starting to make me feel sick. She then tried to give me a small, old, tattered-looking yellowed card. "Se puede llamar a este número, por favor?" she questioned. I stood there like an idiot for a second, not knowing what she had said. I didn't speak Spanish very well, aside from asking if they spoke English, or saying that I didn't understand Spanish. She gave me a small smile before she took the card and pointed at the number on the bottom. I nodded and went to get my phone. On the card, an old cab number, as well as a picture of a cab, worn as the rest of the card, stared back at me as I looked at the number. I punched in the numbers on the phone and waited. It had been just a second before the dial tone gave way to dead air and static. I stood still, my stomach sinking to my feet. I looked at the card again and shut off the phone. I read the number again and again, dialed it into the phone to be sure that I had entered the right number. Same result. Confused, I turned to the woman, my face paling. She was gone. I hadn't even heard her leave. I stuck my head out the door, then went onto the porch and looked around. My dog had stopped barking in the back, so she couldn't have gone around that way. The ground was littered with fallen leaves. I would have heard their footsteps, but I hadn't heard anything. Thoroughly confused, I slipped my feet into my shoes and went outside, still holding my phone and the old card, and went to check the back. The dog was playing with his ball, chewing mercilessly at the old baseball, before looking up at me with a wag of his tail. I watched him a moment before I went back to the front of the house, then checked around the other side. The old woman was nowhere in sight. With shaking hands, I went back into the house, put the phone back on the cradle, and looked at the card. I flipped it over in my hands, looking for a date somewhere on the card, but found none. The slip of paper gave me a feeling of unease. Without hesitation, I took the card and burned it. Since this incident, I've heard knocks on my door, but when I would go to see who it was, they were gone. Sometimes, the phone will ring, and when I answer, the number is unknown, and there's nothing but dead air and static. My sister got the car, a 1970 Lincoln Continental, painted slate gray in pristine shape. I got a CB radio. The saddest day of my life was when my parents sat my sister Jeanette and I down and broke the news. Our grandfather had died of a stroke sometime during the previous night. Jeanette sat stone-faced and stoic. She was well into her terrible teens and showed emotion differently, but tears could not so easily hide from my eyes. "Billy," my mother said with a soft affection and cracked voice, "I promise you, he's in a better place. He's watching us now." Her hand smoothed my back, and I sobbed into her shoulder. The words were meant to give solace, but all I thought of was how wherever he was, I would never see or speak to him in this life again. Pictures of him flashed in my mind, his hand on my shoulder, guiding me on my first bike ride, without training wheels, camping trips in the soon-run woods, where he taught me to fish and understand Morse code. But the mental picture that stuck out the most was him seated in his beat-up love seat, slacks pulled up well past his waist, nose buried in some Dean Koontz book, asking about my day. I would never see him on that chair again. My grandfather had spent the last 12 years in an old folks' home, and pretty much had zilch in the way of material wealth, aside from a few meager possessions and his Continental. So I wasn't disappointed when I learned I had been bequeathed his CB radio. That is, until I heard Jeanette. No tears, stone-faced Jeanette had been given his car. I am ashamed to admit that when I received that crummy taped cardboard box, carrying the radio inside, I threw it in my closet in anger. I was only 14 and had never even so much as started a car. But it was the thought of Jeanette, perpetually sour, who hardly even acknowledged my existence and gave my grandfather so little attention in these last years, had been given his most valuable possession. Time tempers all wounds, and my anger was short-lived. At the end of it all, I missed my grandfather, and that couldn't be tarnished by any disappointment. He was buried a week later, beside my grandmother. 2 months after he had passed, I finally took the cardboard box out of the closet. The radio was short, gray, and rectangular. It had a bunch of dials I didn't know how to work. I couldn't make heads or tails on how to use the machine, so I dug my hands back in the cardboard box thinking, maybe my grandfather had left an instruction manual or something. What I found was treasure, an envelope addressed to me with a note inside. "Billy, if you're reading this now, you know what that means. I love your mother, and your sister was my first grandchild. That's a very special thing. But you have been my favorite since the first day I saw you in that delivery room. One of my greatest memories in the first time I held you in my arms. You wrapped your little fingers around my hand and gurgled. I didn't even care when you spat up on me because you were smiling. There are 2 highlights in my life. The first was marrying your grandmother. You only know her from the stories your mother and I have told. Let me say this, Billy. No story comes close to the reality of the precious time I spent with her. The second highlight of my life was every minute I ever spent with you. You're more than my grandson. You're my best friend. I'm sad that I won't get to watch you grow or see you get married, hold my great-grandchild. I wish I could have said goodbye to you properly. I hope to God there's a heaven above where I can watch over you. The radio, well, CB radios aren't exactly user-friendly, Billy, but I'm sure in time you'll get the hang of it. This Cobra model comes equipped with a battery and a built-in antenna. I've already adjusted the frequency, so all you have to do is switch the far left dial clockwise to power it up. Try not to get into too much trouble. I love you, Grandpa. P.S. Press the button on the left side of the mic to talk and the button on the right side to send out more signals. I know you haven't forgot how Morse works. When I finished reading the letter, I was in tears. Every word written was more precious to me than any Lincoln Continental. Jeanette could have a world of them, and I was fine with that. I had a goodbye and my grandfather's love. After a few minutes of letting the waterworks die down, I turned back to the radio and switched the dial on the left. It sounded like one of those old handheld radios sets turned to a frequency between AM stations. I quickly learned I could change the channel by turning the far right module, or just by clicking the little button that said Seek, which would cycle quickly through the 40 available channels until it found one in use. Wanna give Leanne a call then? She gives a real mean hummer. A distorted voice spoke from the speaker. An equally garbled voice replied, I won't be in Gaines for a month at least, but I'll give her a ring when I come around. That's for sure. I picked up my mic and pressed down on the button to the left. What's a hummer? Get off this frequency, kid. It's in use, said the first voice very angrily. The second one was laughing distorted garbled chortles in the background. I made a mental note to ask my dad what a hummer was before I clicked the seek button again, but there was no other action. Bored, I switched the set off and lay down to sleep. I awoke to the sound of my alarm, which was strange since it was 3:45 in the morning, and I hadn't set it to go off that early. Beep, 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 beep. The fog began to lift from my mind as I was forced up and able to ignore and drift back to sleep. That wasn't my alarm tone. Beep, 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 beep. The same pattern of beeping noises repeated over and over again as I pulled myself up slowly from my bed and made my way to the source, which glowed light blue at the end of my room. Funny, I thought. Didn't I turn you off? I didn't give it any further thought, however. Still groggy and desperate to get back under the lulling warmth of my covers, I switched the CB off and went quickly back to bed. It's funny how quickly life can take on some normalcy after an event so devastating. It had been 3 months since my grandfather had died, and though I still felt the pains of sadness when I thought of him, it was less and less frequent. Instead, my focus turned back to girls in my class, playing computer games with my friends, television, and homework. It was as if my grandfather had never existed for most of my days. The CB radio had gone untouched in all that time. The night of the next occurrence, I was up late reading the Langoliers on my tablet in the appropriate darkness of my room. My parents had gone out to some dinner party and Jeanette, well, she only lived here in name only. I was at that part of the book where Mr. Toomey was running around the airport, head bashed in and in a crazed state, when I noticed that my tablet's glow wasn't the only source of dim illumination. Looking up, I saw that the CB radio had been powered on. Beep, 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 beep. What the hell? I thought as I got up from my bed. I came to the immediate conclusion that the thing must be broken as the beeping pattern kept repeating. Beep, 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 beep. Wait, it hit me fast then. All the lessons my grandfather had given me over the course of years came rushing back. These weren't random bleeps and blops. This was a message. Beep, 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 beep. Miss. Beep, 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 beep. You. I stood frozen in front of the set. Someone must be playing some sort of trick on me. My mind immediately rationalized. But underneath the easy comfort that explanation gave me, I was terrified. The message kept repeating over and over again, until in nervous desperation, I picked up the microphone and spoke. Very funny, I said in a firm voice that cracked round its facade. I continued, but the joke is over, and you should really stop now. It didn't. Again and again, the same message came pulsing through. Miss you, miss you, miss you, miss you. I switched the radio off, but its glow remained, and so did the ceaseless message. What could I do? I couldn't call the police. I would sound absolutely insane, and the thought of breaking the machine would never occur to me. It was my grandfather's last gift after all, so I spoke again. Who is this? Why are you doing this? To my surprise, the message changed briefly. I really wish it hadn't. Grandpa, miss you. I could not move. I could not think. All I could do was stand paralyzed by an insurmountable fear. I had often wished before that day for just one more time with my grandfather, one more chat, one more opportunity to say, I love you. The thoughts would bring in me a bittersweet feeling. In theory, it would have been amazing, but in reality, it was beyond ghastly. I didn't doubt the reality of the moment. I knew innately that my attempt to rationalize this as some prank didn't gel with what my constricted heart felt all too clearly. This was happening. I zoned out in that state of dumbstruck horror as the messages repeated again and again. After a minute, I came to. Grandpa, where are you? I really shouldn't have asked. Front. My heart sunk. Door. The messages stopped. I felt on the verge of passing, but was able to hang on to consciousness out of fear of what may happen to me while I was passed out. There was silence for what seemed like forever. I began to breathe again. Too soon. Scrape, scrape. Tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't have to investigate to know that those sounds were coming from outside of my front door. I couldn't have investigated either way. With tears in my eyes, I felt my horror rise to a level I never thought possible. Here I was, alone at home, being tormented by a ghoul. An actual ghoul, not just a figurative one. And the worst part was, he's my grandfather. The scrapes and taps continued, but that word running through my head had an instant effect on me. The Morse code on the door became muted as my mind remembered him sitting there, on his favorite chair, and asking me about my day with a genuine interest. In my memories, I felt his arm balance me as I attempted not to crash on my first big boy bike ride. I recalled seeing his face take on a youthful glow each time he spoke of my grandma. He was always there for me. My grandfather loved me. Scrape, scrape, tap, 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 tap. I was still crying, but they were different tears now. Not ones of terror, but sadness. I knew what to do. Grandpa, I spoke into the CB microphone. I miss you too. I was bawling now, but also feeling some relief to have been given this moment, as if terror had never been present at all. Scrape, scrape, tap, 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 tap. But you need to go now. You need to go and be with Grandma. The noises slowed. You never got a chance to say goodbye. I didn't either. It's the thing I've wanted more than anything since you left us. I love you, Grandpa. I love you. I'll see you again. I know this. I can't wait to tell you all about my life when I do. The noises stopped. I stood in breathless silence for what seemed like an eternity. And when I realized there would be no more messages to come, I cried both in relief and in sadness. But a part of me was happy too. I'd gotten that one last time with him. I don't know when I passed out that night, and the next day would have felt like a dream if it hadn't been for the phone call. We were all sat round the table, eating our breakfast, or I was trying to. I still felt very, very strange when the phone rang. No, honey, I'll get it, my father said to my mother as he stood up and walked to the phone. Hello? Yes. He looked at Mom with a screwed up face. Finally, after an eternity of listening to the other end of the line, he said, Alright, thank you very much for letting us know. What was it, honey? My mom asked, concerned. He just sat there a moment and looked around at all of us. Well, that was the police. They said that someone had been disturbing your father's grave. The, soil was dug up. My mother's eyes grew wide and her mouth hung open. Honey, it's okay. The officer told us the body wasn't tampered with, but, well, this is strange. They found a handheld CB radio in the casket. My father didn't know what to say. My sister was intrigued and my mother was appalled, but I was strangely content while I feigned an alarmed face. That day I boxed up the CB radio. Like I said before, I would never get rid of my grandfather's last gift to me, but I could sure as hell store it in the garage as far away from myself as possible. I was about to turn the doorknob and head back in the house when I heard it for the last time. I'd like to start by saying there's a nightmare at Dawson's Creek. At least, so my atheist friend tells me. My friend, David Tabler. The man's a drunkard, belligerent and disgruntled as they come. He spends most of his time at various bars around the city, downing glass after glass in a pitiful attempt to drown his troubles. And this is the story of how he ended up like that. It was a Thursday night. I entered my favorite bar, not expecting him to be there. But he was, drunk off his ass, as usual. On the few times we'd see each other in the same joint, usually things would become a philosophical, yet hilariously drunken, at least on his side, debate about religion. But tonight, he stopped me. I walked into the bar, and almost immediately saw him over at the counter. He rolled the ice in his empty glass and ordered another. Don't you think you've had enough? The bartender girl asked him, a serious glare of concern in her eye. Lady, he replied with a drunken slur, when you've seen what I've seen, enough is never enough. I stepped up and told her the usual thing when I met him. Don't worry, I'll take him home if he gets too bad. I sat down beside him and ordered a ginger ale. Ironic that I had a favorite bar, yet didn't drink much more than an occasional mild beer. Our night began with the usual banter, a laugh at a few jokes here and there, and his terrible attempts at flirting with the bartender. But after a while, he turned to me and asked, "Did I ever tell you why I don't believe in God?" The question was point blank and straight as an arrow. I had thought he was going to start yet another debate about it with me, knowing he had never said anything to me about why he didn't believe. I figured he would respond with logic or reason, casual and normal reasoning of an atheist. But it wasn't. "No, you haven't," I answered calmly. He turned all the way towards me, rotating the chair in the drunken haze. I could smell the beer on his breath as he looked me in the eye, and began to respond. "In Ohio, there's an unheard of town called Dawson's Creek. It's a nice enough little hamlet, but a boring place for a tourist. Hangs off an unmapped mountain, and to get to it, you gotta use an unmapped road. You know, I used to travel the country. Back when I believed, I would go to all them caves, old forts, shit like that. I found it interesting, exploring the deepest parts of the American history. One day, though, my truck had broke down just outside of Dawson's Creek. I was out on the road to California when I was there. Didn't even know it existed while I was struggling with OnStar. Found out right after their local mechanic rolled around in his tow truck. He gave me a ride, told my truck to his shop, and told me I was going to spend a good 3 or 4 days there. Nice fella he was. Paid for my stay at the local motel. He swallowed down his last bit of vodka and ordered another glass. The bartender brought it to him and told him it was his last one. He grumbled and turned back to me. "As I said, though, it is a pretty boring little place. Not many sights to see. But I decided on the second day to go for a walk around town. Maybe go to a bar or some shit. That was when I overheard a couple of the locals talking about a cave off the mountain just outside of town. They said it was somewhere off the old dirt road to the west of the place. Hell, I knew where I was going. Dug through my bag for my ropes and my flashlight, and I went off toward that cave. The moment I walked inside, I should have known something would go wrong. It was colder in there than usual. A cave is always a solid 60 degrees. Never above or below, except by 1 or 2 degrees at most. But this cave was fucking freezing. Still though, kept heading in out of a sheer boredom. There are a few slopes. I put some stakes into the rock, which was pretty weak for any cave rock really. Attached my rope and went. Left them there with some marker lights. The cave itself was pretty damn interesting, to say the least. Pretty dank. Had nicely sized stalagmites and stalactites. What was getting me though was that there wasn't a single cave animal, and it appeared that I wasn't the first person to go in. I wasn't too surprised by the latter concern. Town knows about it. So somebody had to go in there, right? He put a cigarette in his mouth and lit it. He exhaled the smoke, sending the wisps through the air of the bar. I went through a few different little areas. No trouble. Just fucking cold. Then, I could have swore something fell in front of me. Something that looked human. Something that I could have swore screamed bloody murder on its way down. But I could only have swore. When I ran toward it, it was gone. Just like that? I asked, peculiarly interested. Just like that. He took another drag from his cancer stick. But that's the thing about caves. When you're in, the only light is what you take with you. It gets so dark you can't even see your hand in front of your face. It ain't hard to get paranoid in there. And it ain't hard to start seeing shit that ain't there either. I kept moving in. God damn, was I a stupid young guy? He chuckled. Anyhow, that's when I screwed up. I tripped. Didn't even notice the damn hole or the slope right in front of it. Tripped right off a fucking ledge, without even a rope on. And then I heard my bone crack. I cringed imagining that. My leg was broke. Real broke. Bone was sticking out in 2 places. There was no way I was getting out of there. Did I mention that it hurt like hell? Well, it did. I remember sitting against the wall, picking up my light so I could see what was around me besides the damn blood from my leg. And I remember screaming in fear as much as I did in pain. He stopped for a moment. Right in front of me. She was right in front of me. Who? Who was she, David? I snapped my fingers in front of his face. He pulled his head back a slight bit. I don't know. I could just tell it was a girl, or at least what was left of her. She was a skeleton. A fucking skeleton in female cave gear. Just fucking laying there. I was out of breath. Breathed in, breathed out, trying to regain my composure. Crawled towards her as much as my broke leg would let me. Trying to see who she was, I guess. Or do something like that. There was nothing. Now, as I said, it ain't hard to see shit in the cave that ain't there. Well, I shouldn't have to say it ain't hard to hear shit either. I was over the body, and I heard an ear-piercing scream, and then a thud. He banged his hand on the table, surprising the bartender. It was like somebody fell off of a ledge. Like someone other than me. Like someone like this girl. I hadn't even touched that body. That pile of bones. But it moved. The goddamn skeleton moved. 1 minute, the hand was above the head. The next, touching my leg. Touching my goddamn broke leg. He began to drunkenly cackle. I moved back toward the wall as fast as my body would take me, breathing in pain. Damned leg. And I sat there. That was when the worst possible thing that could happen happened. My light went out. The battery died, while I was sitting in a fucking hole. A dark and cold fucking hole. Didn't even have my pack. And then, I heard it again. And again and again and again and again and again and again. Same damn scream. Same damn thud. But that ain't it. It was getting closer. The goddamn fall was getting closer and closer. I spent what felt like years down there listening to it. And then I felt it. I'm absolutely sure I felt it. He cackled again and took another swallow of vodka. Felt what? The damn skeleton. It was touching me. I could have swore it was touching me. I could feel it. That wasn't a damn hallucination. I prayed to God that day more than I ever did in my life. Called to a higher power more than ever. Just praying, just hoping to get away from that damned hole, from that fucking skeleton. He calmed down for a moment and breathed, out of breath from his hyperactivity. Then I remembered the lighter in my pocket. I fingered for it and struck it. Just like I thought. That damn skeleton was there, hand on me and all. It was facing toward me, and I saw what made me realize that God was not there for me. There was a cross around her neck. It was one of those ones that a church gives you. A little gold-plated thing that some of them give out. I could have swore that the skeleton was moving right in front of me, and I heard a laugh. Some kind of cackle or laugh or something, and it was coming right from that skeleton. The jawbone was going up and down over and over again. And that's when I gave up hope. I was gonna die in there, and right beside that damn skeleton. But you didn't. You're still here. Bullshit, he chuckled. Look at me. I'm a drunken, soulless old man. But, I replied, is that cross the only reason you lost your faith? He chuckled again. No. What made me lose my faith was the question I asked. What kind of loving God would put someone through shit like that? What kind of merciful God would allow that shit to happen? Even the devil couldn't come up with something as torturous as that. I remember it. Every night when I sleep, I see it. The damn skeleton is in my dreams, driving me insane. Every night the same damned laughing skeleton. That cave, what it contains is so evil in my opinion, that hell itself spat it back out. After you've seen something like it, don't take no logical reason to stop believing in the higher powers. You just know, they ain't there. That girl, she had to have been a Christian, a believer, just like me at the time. But her rest didn't come. She didn't get to go to no eternal paradise. She's simply in that cave, falling over and over again. That torture, it drives your very soul insane. What kind of God would abandon his follower like that? Reliving a fall over and over again, long after your death? Terrifying, that is. And hitting the ground like that, the way I figure, if you're already dead, there ain't nothing that'll take the pain away. Imagine hitting the ground over and over again, but you just can't die. You're already dead, and unable to do anything about it. And the worst part is, she didn't die instantly. When I had my light, I had noticed something beside her. She used one of her stakes and carved a stone beside her. She carved only 3 words. God help me. God didn't answer her prayers. He left her there. God abandoned her. He cackled again, the look on his face a mix of drunkenness and insanity. But how do you know she was a woman of faith? I asked, blank-minded as to what I could say in response. Other than cross and words she carved, I heard her prayers. I tell you, I heard her pray the same as I heard her fall. She cried and cried for God to help her, prayed she would be saved and rescued. She begged for forgiveness for her every misstep, everything she could remember. I could hear her crying all throughout her praying, suffering from the pain of the fall and being trapped down in the cave. I could just imagine sitting there, holding on to that cross, before finally giving up and carving those words into the stone in a desperate attempt to get God to help you. After every fall, every time, a prayer, same phrasing, same words, same female voice. Hearing those things, hearing that desperation, I just can't see it any other way. He swallowed down more of his cup of vodka. I see. But how did you survive? I asked, curious. I don't know. Was told it was a rescue team. I passed out not long after. Woke up in the hospital, my leg bandaged up. I asked them for the names of the people who got me out of there. They gave them to me. Told me to thank him. And I did. But I was wanting more to ask about that skeleton. The first one I went up to. I thanked him, shook his hand and asked, and his reply solidified to me that there was no God. What skeleton? He asked me back. Sure you aren't seeing things. Can get pretty damn dark in those caves. I would have believed him. I really would have. But I know what I saw. That wasn't an hallucination. It was there. She was there. He took his last swallow of vodka and said, But of course, it ain't hard to see shit that ain't there in those caves.